Well, folks, according to recently published research, Dune had a great weekend at the box office, but could have had a whole lot better. As we've talked about here on Valiant Renegade all year long with this day and date release strategy, particularly the one by Warner Media with HBO MAX that Jason Kilar and company have decided to engage in for their entire 2021 theatrical slate. We told you it was a calculated effort to get more subs into HBO Max, but at what cost? Well, the cost is at the box office, and we've got some numbers to talk about today, so stay tuned. We're about to get into it. Renegade Online. So welcome back. It's been a little bit. Wanted to do one of these last weekend, and then the entire Alec Baldwin thing, the set of Rust, the tragic death of Helena Hutchins on the set, and I felt like I needed to take some time to address that more than just another box office roundup. And unfortunately, I only have so much time a week to make a few videos here and there, and I've got to pick and choose wisely. So hated not doing this last week, but in a sense, I'm kind of glad because we got some additional data since then that I think is very relevant to this conversation and hopefully should make it better than what we could have done last weekend. So let's talk about this. And I want to cover some of the stuff with Dune. I also want to talk a little bit about Halloween Kills. In comparison to Dune, both were available day and date on a streaming service, although one movie did markedly better at the box office than the other. And it's not the one you think. But we're going to talk a little bit about that and to share some of my thoughts on this. We've got earnings reports coming out in the last week or two from AT&T, which includes HBO Max, of course. We had some earnings reports from Netflix. We will have Disney, the big dog. We want to find out what Disney Plus is doing. That will be hitting November 10th, just 2 days before Disney Plus Day on November 12th, where we get an announcement of a lot of changes and upcoming things, what they're doing on Disney Plus, new programming, all kind of things. So stay tuned. We will probably do a streaming roundup on or after November 10th with all these different companies, but this is all germane to this box office discussion, is it not? Is it not? So before I get into this, just want to thank everybody for being here, sticking around. This channel is really growing great. We're at about 1,750 subs as I sit here this evening and record this video. So thank you so much. If you have not hit that subscribe button yet, if you're seeing one of these videos for the first time, or if you've watched a few of them and you're enjoying them and you haven't subbed yet, please, I ask you to do that now. It's a big help to getting this stuff out there so we can continue producing content. Hit that notification bell, the like button on this video if you enjoy it. Of course, leave a comment with your thoughts and do share it out on social media. So let's dive into this. So Dune was one of these, one of the two kind of anomalies for Warner Brothers this year, let's call it that. See, everything else that Warner has released was produced and paid entirely for and distributed by Warner Brothers, with the exception of two films so far this year. The first of which was Godzilla vs. Kong, which came out several months ago in the springtime of the year, March, April, and then now Dune. Both of these movies were produced by Legendary Pictures, and they footed about 80% of the bill, with Warner Brothers footing the other 20% on production costs. Of course, Warner Brothers, being the distribution company, are paying for the marketing costs. So earlier this year, when the decision was made, or late last year rather, when Warner Media head honcho Jason Kilar, which may not be around next year once the merger happens with Discovery, we'll see. We've talked about that in another video regarding David Zaslav, the Discovery CEO. But Jason Kilar made the decision, to the theatrical owners' dismay, that would be NATO, the National Association of Theater Owners, to do this day and date release strategy. And of course, Legendary Pictures also sprung up at that news because it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Our money, our investment, our revenues, our success on these two big movies that we just made, that you guys are distributing, you Warner Brothers, it's tied to box office receipts. And you just decided to go ahead and dump this on your streaming service. We have a problem with this. The short version of this is eventually Legendary and Warner Brothers came to an accord. Effectively, what Warner Brothers did in the case of Godzilla vs. Kong is they shelled out a couple of $100 million to Legendary to basically buy the picture from them, buy the rights to distribute it as they saw fit without becoming embroiled in any legal action after the fact, similar to what we saw with Black Widow, with Disney and Scarlett Johansson earlier this year, where ScarJo decided, wait, I'm not getting my back-end deal because you put this on Disney+. She then decided to settle out of court before it went anywhere, and here we are. So this was kind of the same instance. We also talked in a previous video about Ari Emanuel, who runs Endeavor, which is a big talent agency out there in Hollywood, and Endeavor's a big competitor, of course, to CAA. And you know, he made a comment about how amicable their working relationship was with some of these students, or rather how happy he was. I wouldn't say amicable, excuse me, but how happy he was with the outcome of Warner deciding to, you know, pay off his clients, the actors, the producers, everybody else. Another couple $100 million there. I think that was separate and apart, certainly from the Legendary deal, because that the purchase from Legendary was to cover the production costs that Legendary laid out there for Godzilla vs. Kong. So then, lo and behold, they were going to do the same thing now with Dune, and we're looking at the box office right now. And of course, I'm a little perplexed that we're still looking at the $41 million from the opening weekend, which, again, as I record this is 4 days after the opening weekend concluded. We have not had any further updates since then, which hopefully we will see that in the next few days. I'm sure we will. But you have to imagine they did something similar with this picture. They probably had to stroke Legendary yet another check, probably in similar amounts to Godzilla vs. Kong for Dune, maybe even a little bit more, because the production cost on this one was higher. So Warner would have at least had to have bought out the portion that Legendary paid for, and whatever revenue sharing terms on top of that they would have come to. So I figure another $250 million for Warner Brothers to buy this out. But this is what's important. $41 million. $41 million opening weekend. It's not bad. It's not great. It's not what I had expected for Dune. At least not had Dune been put in the theaters as it should have been put exclusively from the get-go. Again, I've not been a fan of this day-and-date release with HBO Max, although I do understand the business decision to try to bolster HBO Max numbers, although I don't know if it's had yet the level of effect that they would have hoped for. They've had a rather steady growth of about 2.2 million new subs per fiscal quarter, and we're not going to know how big of an impact Dune really had, and they have some other stuff coming out before the end of the year, like Matrix, but we're not going to know how much of an impact these big year-end blockbusters have between October 1st and December 30th until at least 4 to 6 weeks into 2022. So late January, early February is when we'll see how good a fourth quarter HBO Max had, and if we could really call this a success. If they picked up, instead of 2 million subs this quarter, if they picked up 3 or 3.5 million new subs in the fourth quarter, then we can look at it and go, okay, short-term loss, long-term gain. This looks like it may have worked, and we'll talk about some of those numbers in a future video as we get closer to those data points and those financial reports from these companies. And again, after the 10th of November, once we get Disney's, we'll do a wrap-up of everybody's streaming stuff that we have so far to this point. So 41 million, it's got 182 million international box office. Worldwide box at this point, 223. As you can see here, it did open in China. It opened in China last weekend. Bond, No Time to Die, opens in China this weekend, which that movie desperately needs because it still has a long way to go. But the good news is, regardless of how the box office performance shakes out for Dune, this part 1 of Dune, they have committed now to making a part 2, and even Ann Sarnoff at Warner Media in an interview a couple of weeks ago, before the movie came out, was discussing that, look, we're not going to strictly look at box office returns to determine whether or not we make a part 2 of this, whether or not we conclude the story, and whether or not we have Legendary back in. It was going to be more about audience reaction, and the audience reaction to this movie has been very positive. Now, again, I can't really get to a theater. If I want to go see this movie in IMAX, because my theaters around here were damaged with the hurricane we had a couple of months ago, they're still under repair. Very heavy damage, unfortunately. The closest IMAX to me is an hour away. And it's difficult for me to break out an entire afternoon or night at that point to drive there, drive back, and of course sit through a damn near 3-hour movie in Dune. So that is a long evening. I did watch it. I have watched it twice so far on HBO Max. I love it. I enjoyed it. I'm a Dune fan. I really like where this is going. I was surprised that I liked some of the things that I did, but that's for another video. Will Dune actually create a profit for Warner Brothers? No, probably not. I don't see at this point how this is going to grow enough legs based on what it had. And even though, and I want to get to this article and discuss this because I think it's important, we have some numbers, and I want to share this with you first, and that is this. These are the numbers from Samba TV. If you have watched this channel before, you know that I like to look up Samba TV numbers when it comes to particularly movies because of the whole day and date thing going on this year. Of course, Samba TV really can't track Netflix because Netflix does not allow it. But as far as these other things like Disney Plus and HBO Max and Peacock and Paramount Plus and some of this other stuff, we can get these numbers. Dune had 1.9 million U.S. households watching its opening weekend from Thursday night when it started on HBO Max. They released it a day earlier to coincide with the Thursday night previews in theaters through Sunday. So same time frame, 1.9 million households. Now, what is a household? Well, I mean, you can look at U.S. Census data and kind of figure out what a household is. And of course, sometimes you tend to adjust things based on the type of movie that you're talking about. Unlike Halloween, for example, which I'll talk about in a second, Dune, you can kind of figure more of a typical U.S. household, right? You got 2.3, 2.5 people per U.S. household. You think of it this way, per account, per HBO Max account is another way to look at this, because typically you wouldn't have more than one account in a given household. That wouldn't make any sense. So you can figure realistically at least 2 sets of eyeballs, 2 people watched Dune on HBO Max per household, per account. So you're talking about almost 4 million people. If we just assume for a second that the average theater ticket price right now that people are buying is still $10, which is what it was listed as back in 2019 before the lockdowns for that year, because 2020 we really didn't have anything. And we know it's higher than $10 now. I mean, you can't find a movie theater ticket. I mean, the cheapest one you can probably find is around $10. Except for maybe Discount Tuesdays or something like that. But you're still talking about some expensive tickets. That's $40 million. Roughly $40 million in foregone box office ticket sales, box office grosses in the opening weekend. And I'm sorry, what again was the opening haul in the domestic territory? Oh, 41 million. So literally, it seems to me that they left half of the money on the table. Now, again, if they picked up a boatload of new subs on HBO Max that came in because of Dune, then we can talk about those numbers, but we just don't know what they are yet. We don't have those numbers. We're not going to have them for months, okay? But if you assume that most of just the existing HBO Max subscribers like me, like I didn't go sign up for a new account for this. I've had HBO Max for some time. You can't really start attributing subscription fees every time a movie comes out if it's a current subscriber. It just gets very dicey. There's no way to really do that. At least not realistically for something like this where we're talking about a movie that had a $165 million production budget before they dropped a dime on global P&A or marketing, print and advertising, P&A. So Dune should have had an $80 to $90 million weekend easily. I think that's very fair to say. Now, yes, they do talk about, and I will bring up the Variety article here that we had in the intro. Warner Brothers should be pleased with the domestic streaming performance of its latest day-and-date film, Dune, that hit the U.S. theaters and HBO Max on Thursday last week, a week ago today. Suggested by TV analytics firm Samba TV, which is the graphic we just pulled up a moment ago. Dune was viewed on HBO Max by 1.9 million U.S. households Thursday to Sunday. Now, of course, that figure is going to go up as the week goes on. More people are going to watch it. I don't think they duplicate households. So, I mean, if you watched it on Friday and then you watched it again on Tuesday, I don't think they're recounting that same household. If you understand how Samba's metrics work, how they collect data, they would easily be able to differentiate between first-time view and a repeat view. They should have no issue with that, to my understanding of how they collect data. So They give us some examples here. Zack Snyder's Justice League, 1.8 million. In the Heights, 700,000. Suicide Squad, 2.8 million. Dune, 1.9 million. Now, we've talked about some of these movies before, like Suicide Squad. Now, Suicide Squad didn't do near as well opening weekend. I think it was like half of what Dune did, if memory serves. But then again, I don't think that there was a lot of interest in Suicide Squad, at least nowhere near to the level of Dune. That being said, that seemed like kind of like Space Jam. That was more one of those movies that people already had HBO Max. They tuned in just out of curiosity. They said, oh, well, I don't want to go see this in a theater, but I'll sit at home and I'll watch this. Fine. Justice League, of course, wasn't in the theaters. And Godzilla vs. Kong and Mortal Kombat, which are also down here. I want to pull those up so you can see this is a list of some of the rest of them that they have. Some of the metrics that Samba collected. Those movies also came out in March and April. And in March and April, there were still a significant portion of major markets like Los Angeles and New York that were still under heavy lockdown restrictions, or the theaters were frankly outright closed. And I believe when Godzilla vs. Kong first came out in LA, they were still completely closed, or they had heavy capacity restrictions. A little bit different. It's kind of hard to compare that, right? So we knew that things like Mortal Kombat and Godzilla vs. Kong, those should have, you would expect to see higher numbers on the Samba viewership at that point because of that. And of course, Godzilla vs. Kong was the first big thing that HBO Max did as a day-and-date release, so people were kind of getting used to this. Part of the problem with all this is that this day-and-date release strategy, as I've talked about here before, is simply that it's confusing people, and it's altering their behavior. I've said all along, people want to get back to the theaters, and we've had some movies that are proving this. You know, we've had a number of movies that prove this, regardless of whether they're making profits or not. And I'm not going to name any names. Get in trouble every time I do. But people have a desire to go back to theaters. When we have studios like this constantly doing day and date, you're changing people's behavioral patterns. It's going to make it much harder to get them back in the theaters if they can go back, but you're telling them, you know what, if you still want, you can sit on your sofa and watch this thing on your 50-inch LED set for free, quote unquote, if you have a subscription already versus going to the theater. So that behavioral change is what's concerning to me. And then now 2022, instead of it being 2021, we've pushed everything back a year. Now 2022 is really going to be the year, because these studios are saying they're all going to go back to theatrical exclusive windows. That's going to be the year next year where you're really going to have to start retraining audiences that, hey, it's not on streaming. You have to go back to the theaters now to see this. They should have been doing that this year. They should have just stuck it out. But they all have this mantra that you have to get more subs, because this is what investors like out there on Wall Street, is number of subs, and they're not, in my opinion, they're not looking at the numbers, they're not looking at the financials in the same way. But again, I understand to a degree what these studios are trying to do. So, you know, this is something to look at. I think it's interesting. I think this screwed Dune. I think the other thing that screwed Dune in this case was the fact that they released it in certain foreign markets 2 months ago, or whatever it was, 6 weeks ago. I mean, it's crazy. If we look down here, this is back at the numbers. I want you to look. I want you to look here, like my buddy Andre over at Midnight's Edge in Norway. This sucker came out on September 15th out there. It's crazy. Iceland, same thing. I know these are smaller markets. I get that. But I think it kind of sapped away a lot of the hype for this, as opposed to getting everything out there together at the same time. I think it would have been much better, but I am thrilled that Dune 2 is moving forward. Okay, so I want to do one other thing on this, because I think this is important to understand. And this is a bizarre one. Halloween Kills. I want to go back to this one. Halloween Kills. So this sucker opened with 50 million, 10 million more than Dune. Now, part of the reason I think for this is very simple. Halloween Kills, yes, it was available on a streaming service, Peacock, day and date. Now, you can get Peacock for free, unlike HBO Max, which will cost you either $10 or $15 depending on the level of service you select. Peacock is available for free. However, if you want the premieres like Halloween Kills, you have to at least step up to the $4.99 a month level. They have that, and then they have a $10 a month level that's ad-free. But so I signed up for the $4.99 a month. I think, honestly, most people don't know Peacock exists. Peacock boasts that they have somewhere around 55 million subscribers. But then in the same breath, they talk about they only have like 20 some odd million, quote unquote, active subscribers. And I think that term active in their world translates into paying. Because like I said in a previous video, my impression is the overwhelming majority of Peacock subscribers are on the free side. They just signed up for it so they can go stream like The Office and stuff like this. You know, old shows they've had before. They're not getting the premium content that you have to get when you pay for it. So the real paying content side of Peacock is much smaller. It's less than half the size of HBO Max. So in other words, there weren't as many people that A, were aware that it was on Peacock, Halloween Kills, and B, or they were, but they didn't have the pay side and they weren't going to pay for it, and they just went to the theater anyway. Also, Halloween Kills was not touted like Dune was, conversely. It wasn't touted as a dual release. They mentioned it, but I mean, Dune for months, HBO has been blasting this. Warner Media has been blasting this, that you can watch it in theaters or you can sit at home and watch it on HBO Max, whereas Halloween just advertised it as a movie coming out. Go see it in theaters. Oh, by the way, but it's on Peacock too. So I think that had a lot to do with it. Halloween Kills, you know, it's a movie with a $10 to $15 million budget, a movie that probably had at least another $40 million in global P&A, print and advertising, because, again, you cannot get away with promoting a movie at all these days, really, for less than $30 to $40 million. 30 to 40 million was the average global P&A expenditure back in 2007 for a Hollywood studio. We're almost 15 years removed from that, and I promise you the prices have only gone up. So, you know, Halloween Kills, if it can get itself over $100 million, I think comfortably it'll be into profit margin territory. Certainly it made back its production budget, but it's that marketing budget that you have to make back. Don't forget, James Wan's The Nun back in 2018 with a $22 million budget, according to Deadline magazine, had a P&A expenditure of almost $90 million in addition to the $22 they spent on production budget. And again, these horror movies, yeah, they're cheap to make, but it still costs money to advertise them, and you can't get away from that. So, you know, this still has a little ways to go. But again, this is one of those things to where they're probably hoping they got more paid subscribers like me signing up on Peacock for some of this premium content. Now, whether or not I keep it is another story. I might cancel it next month. We'll see. So, any case, let me know your thoughts and comments below. You know, I didn't really have time at this point to get into Venom. Venom still does not have a Chinese release date. It may or may not, but it is expected that they will. It's at about $353 million at this point. Like I said before, I think if it gets up to around you know, 375 to 400 million, I think we can comfortably say it's in profit territory. Again, a movie with about $110 million production budget, easily for a movie like that, easily another $80 to $90 million in global print and advertising marketing. No way it's any less than that. No way Sony spent less than that on that movie. That is stock standard. And Sony, like Warner Brothers, is one of the studios that tends to spend more on global P&A than a lot of other studios do. So, any case, like I said, leave some thoughts and comments below. Good to see everybody. Stay tuned. We got some more news coming up. We're going to be talking about a little bit of Disney, Star Wars, Lucasfilm stuff, I'm sure, in the next few days, because we have a certain somebody whose contract who is reportedly up October 30th, and we still have crickets out there, folks, which is very unusual. The last two times that Kathleen Kennedy was renewed, we knew over a month in advance. So it's been quiet. Check out my conversation with Cameron Pasha a few days ago where we discussed that, and I've already talked to Cameron again this week. He and I are going to have a lot to discuss next week, I have a feeling, so stay tuned. That is going to be a hell of a conversation. Hopefully a good one. Might get a bottle of brandy out for that one. We'll see. Take care.